want to say first, thanks for not being biased. You know what I mean? When you talk about Ohio State versus Notre Dame, I know Notre Dame is going to be an underdog going in, but I just want to say thank you for not being biased at all with that, especially coming from you being an Ohio State fan.
Before you continue, I will most likely say something similar to what I said going into the Oregon game, and Ohio State fans didn't like this, but going into the Oregon game, I was like, 14 points. Goodness, give that to me right this second. And if this spread holds at 13, 14, 15, give me Notre Dame.
Yeah, you know what I mean? It's tough because Marcus Freeman's changing the whole culture.
Yep.
And I feel like a lot of people are judging Notre Dame for the last 10 years, 11 years with Brian Kelly. And I don't think it's fair. Like, I understand why, because perceptions have to battle. But if you see what Marcus Freeman's doing, he's changing the recruiting classes. He's going after top prospects. The 3 stars is no more. It's 4 stars and 5 stars. And I'm not saying they won't get 3 stars, but what I am saying is, if we're going to make an argument, it kind of sucks because we can say the last 5 years Notre Dame really hasn't done anything. They've had some great seasons, but in reality they got blown out against the big dogs, the Clemsons, the Alabamas. But I don't think it's fair to judge Marcus Freeman in that picture. And I feel like a lot of people are saying Notre Dame's going to be the same old Notre Dame.
Well, it's almost like the Lincoln Riley thing we were talking about a few minutes ago, though. You have to understand, until people like Marcus Freeman, this is not Urban Meyer taking over Notre Dame, who can flash a zillion wins and the best winning percentage of all time and 3 national championship rings and some ungodly bowl record. Marcus Freeman hasn't proven anything at the head coaching level. So you got to understand where people are coming from. Notre Dame hasn't won a major bowl game since 1994. And Marcus Freeman has done nothing as a head coach. He hasn't failed because he's just never been one. So you got to understand where people are coming from. They want some proof.
Oh, no, I get that. But what I am saying, the first step is changing the recruiting, the mindset, the gap closers, as Brian Driscoll likes to say. And I think that's true. They're definitely closing the gap. Are they there yet? No, I think it's going to take at least 2 to 3 recruiting classes with top 3, recruiting classes to actually be in that picture where they can survive against a team like Alabama or survive against a team like Ohio State. You know what I mean? Where it would be like flip of the coin who can actually win. But I will say that the one team that I'm scared of this season is the Ohio State game. I think if Notre Dame somehow can go into the shoe and actually win, I think they'll win out. I don't know what happens in the playoffs, but I think if they go in the shoe and win, they can win out the regular season. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, I'm going to make it clear first and foremost that because I know somebody's going to pin me down to this Notre Dame 13 or 14 points. That doesn't mean Ohio State could not beat Notre Dame by. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the odds, in my estimation, weigh heavily that Notre Dame's going to stay within 2 touchdowns of Ohio State. It could be a really good game, and Ohio State could break it open with 5 minutes left and win it, turn a 28-24 game into a 42-24 final, and they won by 18. That happens all the time. Shoot, what happened with Notre Dame and Wisconsin last year. That was a 1-score game until like 6 minutes left in the game, and then it just went haywire. So 2 pick sixes and all this other stuff. So anyway, that aside, if Notre Dame beats Ohio State, well, obviously they're only going to have one enormous game. Not that they couldn't lose to other teams on the schedule, of course, but they've got one team that is supposed to be better than them, and it's at home. And if they're good enough to beat Ohio State, sure, they could run the table. I think that's a lot to ask, but it's possible. They probably have as good a team as they did in 2018, and they did it.
Yeah.
Against a lesser
I was going to
schedule.
say I'd rather play Ohio State. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say I'd rather play Ohio State game 1 than game 7 or 8. That's one thing.
Oh, I agree with that. And you saw the blueprint against Oregon last year. And for as good as Jim Knowles is in coordinating a defense, it's still going to be the first game of the season. and it's the first time he's going to have a game plan implemented, and he's not going to have game tape to work off of to correct deficiencies in the defense.
Yeah. I do got one question. Who do you actually see in the playoffs this season coming up?
Well, I do think that Alabama and Georgia are not just the two best teams, but they're the two best teams that I'm sure of. I believe that Ohio State's practically as talented as those two, but I have to see the defensive issues fixed. Jim Knowles went to Oklahoma State, and it took him a few years to improve their defense. Now he's working with more talented players, but I'm not just completely 100% sold that Ohio State's fixed everything and then they're on that same plane with those two, but they would be the third one. So I'm pretty confident those three teams are going to make the playoffs unless there's an upset loss in season that knocks out an SEC, one of those two, let's say, gets tagged with a second loss. Like if Alabama would have lost like they did to Texas A&M this past year, then lost to Georgia in the SEC championship game, and people still think they're one of the four best teams, but they get eliminated from the playoffs. So I'm fairly confident in those three teams, and then it's me trying to search and find another team. And my consideration is going to go pretty much in order: Clemson, Notre Dame, and then some grouping of Baylor, Utah, USC, Wisconsin, Penn State, Miami, Texas A&M. But if you're going to nail me down to four right this second, I will throw in Notre Dame into the fourth spot. I picked Notre Dame to go 11-1 and make the playoff last year, and they did that, but they just didn't make the playoff.
Yeah. One last question for you. Gotta let me go. Over under Brian Kelly out within 3 years, or do you think he'll be in LSU for a while?
Oh, I think they're going to be patient with him as much as an SEC power is patient. So I don't think he can do much wrong for 3 years. Like I think he could go 7-5, 7-5, 8-4, and he'd still have a job. And then by the fourth year, they'd be like, okay, it's time.
Yeah. Well, Mark, thank you very much for taking my phone call. It was great talking to you. Go Irish. Can't wait for week 1.
Appreciate the call. Have a good night.